Mr. Parks joining, we do have a quorum, so we can go ahead and get started. Sherry, Ms. Brown is the chair of the meeting, but I don't know if it would be easier, since this is a virtual meeting, if you wanted me to just go through the agenda.
Heather, if you can handle it, it'll be easier, I think, with virtual.
Okay. All right. And then I just wanted to thank everybody. And we also had Mr. Rossi join. I want to thank everybody for being flexible in your time and having a virtual meeting. I didn't lose my voice until today. So hopefully you can deal with it. I'm hoping I'll be able to make it through this meeting. I thought it was important to continue with this meeting just because of the legislative session and where we're at. But before that, I wanted to we can do introductions of everybody who's on the call. So we have Miss Sizzle is on the call, Miss Brown is on the call, Mr. Rossi is on the call, and Mr. Fike is on the call. Mr. Dufresne is budget manager in the budget department, and he's on as well. So I was going to get started with the budget update. And this has been a very interesting legislative session and very unexpected. As prior to, last week, I expected by the end of May, we would be certain to have, or actually by this meeting, I thought we would be certain to have a final budget. That it appeared that both the House and the Senate had an agreement, and then the Senate ended up, there was some positioning by the governor that said that he was going to veto. And so at that point, the Senate was siding more. It appeared the Senate was siding more with the governor, and they had to go back and relook at the budget again. And from what I presented at our last committee meeting, the House is looking, there's just fundamental differences in what they want to do with the budget. The House wants to have a reduction in sales tax, which quite honestly doesn't make sense. We're entering into a lot of uncertainty at the federal level, and then we have the state wanting to do a self-imposed reduction of revenue, of recurring ongoing revenue, and that's what the House proposal is a reduction in the sales tax. And the governor pretty much said that that's a no-go. That Senate on the other side was looking more at having some one-time relief in property taxes, not something that was recurring, but some one-time relief, and that aligned with more of what the governor's proposal was. We did get a letter that was sent out by the Senate president yesterday that said that they have still been in talks between the House and the Senate, and he said that they are not recommending that the legislatures come back next week, but they do anticipate that they will be back and will call them back after Memorial Day. So it is possible that we will have a budget prior to the end of June, but it is possible that it could extend all the way through the end of June. We have very prescriptive timelines from our truth and millage reporting requirements, and that's how we have to notify the public of what the millage rate is going to be in the next year. And this is the first time that I can remember in a long time. Even going back, I was trying to think whether during ESSER we had we had a lot of concerns as to what the budget was going to look like as well. But I don't recall it going this late into the year and potentially impacting those TRIM reporting requirements. But it is good news that both the House and Senate have continued to talk, and there is a chance that we might have a compromise sooner than the end of June. There have been some bills that have been sent to the governor and we are waiting for the governor to actually sign off on those bills. And it was a very interesting session, and just, I said in our last meeting, either everything's going to pass or nothing's going to pass. And it was kind of a little bit of a hybrid where there were just some things that were just added into bills that really truly didn't make sense. But the bills that have been sent to the governor that we're waiting to see if he signs off on is, we have House Bill 1105 that has the standard monitoring. And these are just the ones that have a financial impact, because there are other bills, but these are only the only ones that have a financial impact. But the education bill has the monitoring contract for charter schools, which is not going to impact our district, because we already have a standard monitoring tools for our charter schools. This bill does also eliminate the requirement where if your school is going to convert to a charter school, you used to need parent support as well as teacher support, 50% of teacher support, and this bill eliminates the requirement to have 50% teacher support to become a charter school, a conversion charter school. And this bill also included the ability for a municipality to apply for what's called a job engine charter. The Senate Bill 296 is the adjustment to the middle school and high school start times, which is allowing school districts to submit a plan as to what the impact of changing the middle school and high school start times would be, thereby allowing districts to comply with the requirement by submitting a plan and submitting like what the impact would be, but not have to actually go forward and make those changes. And so that is actually a big win for not only districts, parents. Nobody wanted to see a change in the middle school and high school start times. And the last is the Senate Bill 1470, school safety. And there was a lot of when this bill was passed originally, the school safety bill was passed originally, it had some unintended consequences of the amount of time that we would need to have. School districts would have to have actual school police officers or guardians on site, and it was not intended by the original bills, but when you actually read the language of the bills, there was, like I said, unintended consequences, and it was causing school districts to potentially have to not allow access to certain activities after school. And so this bill clarifies what was truly intended initially, is that the security was during the school day and only 30 minutes before and after the school day, not the whole entire time that the campus is open. And that was causing, like I said, logistical problems at each of the schools. And also even staffing problems in order to ensure that they had the appropriate staff in order to monitor all locations at the school sites. So these are three bills that we're hoping that the governor does sign, or at least Senate Bill 296 of 1470 will have a beneficial impact to the district, and 1105. We were disappointed that they took out the 50% teacher support and for the conversion charter school. With the FEFP, there's no change to the House and Senate budget proposals, so I'm not going to spend much time on those. But what I want to, since I had to go through and we had to balance the budget because we have such a prescriptive timeline under Truth and Millage, the way that I balanced the budget was on what is considered the worst case scenario, which is the House proposal. And that way, if we can balance the budget based on the House proposal, then anything we get over and above the House proposal, we could then set aside for salary increases. So that was our plan in order to be able to make sure that we can comply with the reporting requirements so that we can have a balanced budget and not have to sit there and wait until the legislature came to a compromise as to what the budget was going to look like. So we balanced the budget based on the worst case proposal. So with the House proposal, we were starting with a deficit of $11 million. And if you remember from our last discussion, we were looking at a $40 million shortfall once you took into consideration the increase in the teacher compensation, because we have to set that amount aside specifically for teacher raises. And we had the increase in the health premiums, but we also had set aside a reserve in the prior year that I helped offset what that impact was. So the total impact of the health premium increase for fiscal year 26 is $11.9 million or $12 million. We have an increase to the contingency reserve of 3%, which is $2 million. With the House proposal is continuing to include vouchers within the FEFP, and by including the vouchers within the FEFP, even though we, as for district operated schools, are seeing a decrease in revenue, there's an increase in total revenue because of the increase in vouchers. And as a result of that, we do have to increase the contingency reserve. If at the end of the day, there's a compromise in vouchers and Family Empowerment Scholarship is pulled out of FES or is pulled out of the FEFP, then we would not need to have this additional amount added to the contingency reserve. So that would be $2 million we would be able to pull out and to offset and to add to a general salary reserve. Was concerned about the increase in the FPL rates, which there will be an increase, but it won't really be an increase for our district. We won't see the impact until FY 27, 28, and 29. So we are not going to have to worry about that increase for FY 26. We did align our staffing with projected enrollment. The impact of that additional staffing that we added at the school sites was $3 million. But what I need to make sure to highlight is that from the state perspective, they are proposing that the district is going to see a decline in enrollment. And we were budgeting that we were going to see enrollment was going to be flat. And in addition, we saw an increase in special needs students as well as an increase in ELL students. And that's what's necessitating an increase in staffing. So if projected enrollment actually comes in at what we, the district, have projected, then we would actually see increased revenue as well. If enrollment doesn't come in like the district projected, then when we make our adjustments on the 11th day of school, we would then see a reduction in our in staffing, because we do align our staffing with enrollment. So we would then see a reduction in expenditures. And so that is something that's unique for this year that we haven't seen in previous years, is we do have a disagreement as to where we as a district budgeted versus where the state has projected our district enrollment. We have the impact and the changes in departments that we talked about in our last meeting, which is really limited just to contractual increases, and that's about $400,000. We have the impact and the changes in schools, and that was the band and the athletics pilot. That's the $1.4 million. And the salary settlement, the annualized impact is for those bargaining groups that are on a calendar year basis. So that's SEIU and and also ASOP, which is part of the non-bargaining unit. They have a January 1st a contractual date. So we would need to, and we're still in negotiations with SEIU, but this sets aside the same 4% increase that we already allocated to the ASOP bargaining group. That allocates a 4% increase to SEIU, and that's to recognize the annual impact for a whole fiscal year, since the 4% would only be retroactive to January 1st. So taking into consideration all of those different impacts, we're at a shortfall of $40 million. The majority of that $40 million is going to be allocated back to high schools, and that's that change in the add-on FTE, the advanced coursework, AP, ACE, industry certification, and IB. It does look like both the House and the Senate, that is something that has not changed since I've last reported to you. They're both in agreement that the add-on FTE will be reduced by 50%. The majority of that add-on FTE is allocated directly back to high schools, and then high schools use that for supplemental funding and supplemental resources to help benefit their students. There's going to be a significant impact, negative impact to those high schools to absorb this reduction in funding, but that is funding that's allocated directly to them. So there are other districts that keep that money centrally, so they'll be handling that reduction more centralized. But in Palm Beach County, we have really read the intent of the statute language, which does require 80% of that funding to be allocated directly back to high schools, and that's how we've handled it in the past. And so it is, and unfortunately, that's going to be a direct impact to each of those high schools. And so we've already informed the high schools, and we've already made adjustments to their school budgets in order to reduce that add-on FTE so that they could see what the actual impact would be. And then then there's an additional approximately a little less than $20 million, about $17 million left to balance. And so I went and looked at everything within the budget to say what other amounts are we able to adjust. So we set aside an annual reserve for hurricanes of $5 million, and so I've reduced that set aside to $2.5 million. We still have funds set aside within the capital projects fund as well as self-insurance fund. And so I was able to reduce the hurricane set aside, and that $2.5 million is really just to get started. If there is a storm that is going to be coming, when it's prevalent and it's known that there's a storm that's going to be coming, we start entering purchase orders for debris pickup and anything that will help during that initial time period of the storm. I also looked at other reserves that we have, and with for example, the Count A reserve, I was able to reduce that Count A reserve because, like I said, this was a unique year and where we did not, where the school district projected that our enrollment was going to be higher than the state. That has not happened before. So I didn't have to have the same amount set aside within our Count A adjustment reserve because we're already assuming that we're having more, that we're projecting we're going to have more students. So if we end up having more students, then we're going to get additional revenue. If we don't, we'll be adjusting our staffing. in order to align. And with the prorated holdback, the purpose of the prorated holdback is if at the state level they don't project sufficient enrollment, then they go back and they adjust each district. They're going to hold back funding from each district in order to make up the enrollment that's above the amount that they projected. And I went back and looked our last year, the prorated holdback for our district was $10 million. We are still waiting to see whether with the fourth calculation that's going to be adjusted down further. But that's been adjusted to $10 million. And there also is the $250 million set aside that the legislature has agreed to include. And we're waiting to see if they're going to include it this year as well. That if that increase is a result of an increase in vouchers, then they use that $250 million set aside in order to help to offset that prorated holdback. And so I was able to slightly reduce that prorated holdback. So the combined adjustment was between those two was $10 million. And finally, I looked at something we look at each year is our fringe benefit rate. And in FY25, it was a very unique year in that there ended up being no increase, a very nominal increase in our FRS rate. And during the legislative session, it could have been as much as a 5% increase. And we ended up, the previous year was 1.8% increase or an $18 million increase. And when I was going through the average salaries and planning the budget, there was a lot of uncertainty as to what that FRS rate would look like. And so we proceeded with what the prior year increase in the FRS rate was, because it could be as much as 5%. So we ended up having additional, a higher FRS rate built into the budget than what we actually needed in FY25. So the net impact ended up being, we were able to do a $5 million reduction within the fringe benefit rate. At the end of all of that, we end up at pretty much a balanced budget. I won't say a surplus at $90,000. We end up at a balanced budget. But that means we have no additional money set aside for salaries other than the $6 million, which is part of the teacher compensation categorical. And that's why anything that comes in addition to what we do presume the House proposal, which is the worst case scenario, any additional revenue that comes in would be added to not just a teacher, but a general salary reserve. So what have we done within the general fund? We know that this is really, FY26 is really the first of what we expect at least the next 2 years to be very challenging budget years, not just at the education level, but at the state level. So we've implemented a hiring freeze for non-instructional staff. We have also performed a review of our central office overhead. We've updated our analysis. We last worked with Education Resource Strategies back in FY16. And we updated our overhead as a percentage of total expenses. And over the past 10 years, we've declined from 7% to 4%. And although that doesn't mean we're not going to cut more, this is just an initial analysis as part of what we know is going to be challenging budget times over at least the next 3 upcoming years. now you can see that for the average, the median of the districts that participated, the average, what ERS calls leadership and management, which is really district overhead, was 5.5%. Palm Beach was 4.1%. So we were below the median range. When doing this comparison, you need to make sure that you're doing an apples to apples comparison. Palm Beach participates with ERS, and ERS asks districts to voluntarily participate in this exercise and provide all the information so that when ERS was doing the comparisons, that they could make sure, like I said, that was apples to apples comparisons, because there are certain things that we in Palm Beach might treat centrally versus other districts might treat as an overhead cost that is allocated directly to school sites. We might call them different names. So they worked very closely with each of the districts to make sure that the information aligned and could also be relied upon. And Palm Beach, which I'll show in the next slide, is the largest district that participated, and ERS is hoping to expand the number of districts that participate next year. But the median of the districts that participated was 5.5%. In Palm Beach, it was 4.1%. The last time that we participated with ERS, like I said, it was our district overhead was a total of 7%. Like I mentioned, Palm Beach is the largest district that participated, which does give us the ability to have economies of scale because we are a larger district. We have 165,000 because it's only looking at district operated schools versus the smallest district has about 30,000 students. Giving a little bit of an overview of what's included in leadership and management. So it's governance, it's operations, it's business services. It's also looking at overhead when you're looking at instruction, curriculum department, the support that's provided on the centrally to the academic side. When you break out the different components, you can see compared to the median, the blue part of the bar is business services. The green part is instructional support and professional growth. The purplish color is leadership, and the green is pupil services and enrichment. So the largest bulk of it is business services. In comparing the staffing across 10,000 students, which that was their way to equate it because our districts are varied widely by size. And so next we're going to break down the business services, because when I was looking at that number, I was surprised, even though we are lower than the median, I was still surprised that ours appeared to be so high because we are larger. So I expected to see more economies of scale. The largest component of business services is data processing and information services. So that did make sense to me because we are a district that is, we are one-to-one with our devices. And we've had other reviews done recently that have, who actually had concerns that we didn't have adequate centralized support for the technology at the school sites. So in looking at the business services component of it, the largest piece of it is the data processing and the information services, which is the IT piece. And then we know that with human resources, that was on par at exactly 10. And we have invested in increasing our human resources because we had a significant delay in the amount of time that it took to hire instructional staff. So we did invest in adding additional staff within HR, and we have significantly reduced that timeline that it takes to onboard personnel. So, in looking at the next budget, it's our special revenue budget is going to be balanced, as well as our capital projects budget. But special revenue is also going to face a lot of uncertainty, not looking at FY26, but looking at FY27 and beyond, because it is very dependent on what happens at the federal level. And so we're going to continue to monitor that and be able to make changes for future years. But for right now, it looks like our FY26 budgets appear to be set. And it's just, like I said, it's, what's going to happen with FY27 and beyond. And we should have more information once we get into the fall. But it would be right now, the grants that we're monitoring are Title II, Title III, and Title IV. So those are the three grants, as well as Head Start and the food and nutrition cluster, whether there will be any changes or impacts to any of those programs. So we're actively monitoring all of those, as well as any new ones that may be highlighted. And then in terms of the capital budget, we're very fortunate that the sales tax was approved by the voters in November 2024. So we do have a balanced capital plan going forward, which we presented in the last meeting. But we're going to continue to monitor the financial impact that the tariffs may have as a result, resulting in increased pricing. So we'll continue to monitor enrollment. What happens on the count day, the 11th day of school, and whether we see an increase or whether we're able to maintain our enrollment, which is how the schools were budgeted, or whether we're going to see a decline like was projected by the state. Really monitoring what the impact of enrollment is going to be, continuing to monitor the legislative changes that come forward. Our funding and the amount of money that we have available for raises for employees is tied directly to the funding increases provided by the state. Looking at the increases in the FRS rates the last 2 years, this past year, we had a very nominal increase in the FRS rate. This year, it was 0.5% of increase in FRS. Previous years were significantly higher. And so what are those increases in the FRS rate going to be? And what other changes are going to continue to be made in order to add and divert funding from traditional public schools? How can they expand, additional funding being routed to private schools? We have our healthcare premiums. We have a 3-year contractual commitment to increasing healthcare premiums. So in FY27, that's an increase of $8.6 million and $2.6 million in 28. In looking at instructional materials, we were able to use instructional material reserve set aside to fully fund the adoptions in 2026. The 2027 is a much smaller adoption, but in looking in 28 and in 29, we are short of $15 million. Potentially, there's an additional $15 million that we're going to need in funding in 28, an additional $15 million in 29, and $10 million in FY30. So the increase in instructional material costs and adoptions is going to have a significant impact in future years as well. And then we're still waiting for, finalizing the impact of the FPL rate increases in 27, 28, and 29. And then we're all monitoring what those impact of the tariffs are going to be as well, because we have tariffs and then they remove the tariffs. So we're continuing to monitor the impact of the tariffs and how the impacts they'll have on the operating fund, but most likely more significantly, the impacts that they'll have on the capital projects fund. Like I also mentioned, the impact of the changes at the federal level and what's going to happen from a federal grant perspective in terms of what grants potentially are going to be cut, or how is the funding going to be impacted, so that we can, and because they're looking at what is coming down from funding from the state for education purposes. We're going to have limited funding available to help absorb any shortfalls that we see on the federal side. So right now, I can tell you I'm really uncertain as to when the House and Senate are going to be able to come to a compromise on what the budget is going to look like. I am confident that the House really is the worst case scenario. And so anything that comes in that's over and above what the House has originally proposed will be able to set aside in additional salary increases. Can't even say additional salary increases, but being set aside for salary increase. So with the legislative session, we have a chance of it ending like by the Senate's proposal, which was by June 6th, which is what the Senate is still aiming for. But the House has also put in for the ability that it could extend all the way until the end of June. Tentative budget adoption cannot go beyond July 30th per trim requirements. And that's because we have our board meetings on Wednesday, and so that we cannot go past August 4th in terms of having our tentative budget adopted by the board. And so our last board meeting that we could have is July 30th. And so that's why when we're, there is definitely a timeline from a legislative perspective as to when the budget can be finalized, because the Department of Education needs that information to be able to tell us what our required local effort is going to be, which is what we then need to advertise and inform constituents so that they know what their millage rate is. And so the legislature is truly on a timeline in order for us to be able to receive that information, to be able to provide timely to the constituents. There has not, in speaking with our representatives from the Department of Education, that is something that has never been missed in the past, and it's not a deadline that can be missed. So they really are working against the clock, and I'm hopeful that the House and Senate will be able to come to a conclusion well before that the June 30th timeline that the House laid out, and that it will more align with the Senate proposal being done the first week of June. And then we have final budget adoption will be on September 10th. So with that, I would like to open it up to the committee to see if you have any questions. All right, so it doesn't appear that there are any questions. I wanted to move to the next item on the agenda, which is the minutes from our April 18th meeting. And if there's, so we have two action items. So one would be the minutes, and the next would be to go over the draft report of the board to the draft report of the budget from the committee to the board. So for the first agenda item for the minutes, is there, we would need to be able to take somebody willing to take a motion for the minutes.
Move to approve, Sherry.
Is somebody willing to second? Can somebody second?
Seconded.
Okay, Mrs.
Sorry,
Ols.
I had unmute.
Okay, no problem. Mrs. Ols seconded. All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay. All right, and then for the next item on the agenda would be the draft report to the board. And so I provided a draft report for everyone to review. And so we're looking for feedback on that report. Or another option is that I can work with the chair of the committee, and this report to the board is normally reported out at the tentative budget adoption, which would be on July 30th. And so first I would need to ask if Ms. Brown is available on that day to report to the board.
I am not in town on the 30th. And I did read through the report though, and I don't really have any comments or changes to it.
Okay. So if, as the vice chair, Ms. Sizzle, I don't know if you would be available on that day to
Can you say
report.
the date again? Sorry.
It's July 30th.
Yeah, I should be here.
Okay. Okay. And so also from the rest of the committee members, if you wanted to provide feedback now, or if you want to take time to look through the report, then you can provide feedback back to me. And then I can work with the chair to finalize the final draft that goes back to the board. And so I would like to take the, so for the agenda, I'm sorry, Sherry, because I really don't do this, but so for the agenda, for the report to the board, I need somebody to accept the report, and then we need somebody to.
I'll make a motion to accept the report and submit it to the board.
Okay.
Is that good?
Yes, yeah, that's good. And then let me see this, and Mrs. will second, and then Mr. Parks, I think you had a comment. Mr. Parks, I saw that you made a comment. Oh, you cannot unmute. It looks fine to me. Okay. All right. No, I see that. Thank you. All right. So Mr. Parks accepts it as well. All right. And so all in favor. So then that would be all in favor.
Aye.
All right. All right. Well, thank you. All right. And I think that is the last item on the agenda. So if something comes back and if it ends up where we're not receiving if after the House and Senate come to a conclusion, if it ends up that the House was not the worst case scenario, I will then, and it ends up coming back worse than what the House proposal is, then I will call the committee back together again. But I won't presume, I mean, with what we were looking at from the House proposal, I think that is, I'm hoping that will be the worst case scenario, because at that point we will need to make additional cuts. And so I will bring the committee back. If not, then if we end up receiving additional funding, that funding, like I said, will be added to a salary reserve, and we'll proceed with the draft report that the committee approved. All right, well, I want to thank everybody for joining today and being flexible and dealing with me with my lost voice. But
I hope you get to go back to bed after this now.
All right, well, thank you. I know, I think I do need a nap now. All right, thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Okay, bye.